My name is Hannah Miller, and I was 34 when I finally understood that blood can be the cruelest kind of stranger. For years, I told myself my family was complicated, not harmful. My mother was old-fashioned. My father was strict. My older sister Grace was blunt. Those were the soft little lies I used to keep peace at holiday dinners, birthday parties, summer barbecues, and every other family gathering where my daughter Molly somehow ended up sitting alone while everyone else praised Grace's daughter, Brianna. Ethan noticed before I did. "She doesn't feel welcome there," he told me once, after a 4th of July cookout at my parents' lake house. I remember laughing it off while folding Molly's little cardigan into her overnight bag. "She's shy. My family is loud. That's all." But Ethan didn't laugh. He just looked at me in that steady way he had, like he was waiting for me to stop defending people who kept proving him right. I should have listened. It started with a work trip. 3 days. Nothing dramatic. Ethan had a conference in Atlanta, and I had one in San Francisco. Our schedules lined up so perfectly, it almost felt like a gift. My parents had been asking to keep Molly for a weekend for months, saying they missed having a little girl around. But what they really meant was Brianna. Brianna was everything my parents admired. Loud, athletic, fearless, always performing. She ran into rooms like applause was waiting for her. Molly was different, softer, watchful. She loved sketchbooks, foxes, rainy windows, and books with worn-out corners. She was the kind of child who noticed when adults lowered their voices. We dropped her off on a Friday afternoon. Molly stood in my parents' front hallway, clutching her backpack, staring at Max, their enormous golden retriever. He was nearly 90 pounds, badly trained, and always lunging with excitement. Ethan had warned them more than once to keep Max away from Molly. My mother waved her hand. "He's just friendly." Molly leaned into Ethan's side and whispered, "I have a weird feeling." I kissed her forehead. "We'll be back before you know it, sweetheart. I'll bring you something from California." Ethan crouched in front of her. "Call us any time. For anything." She nodded, but her eyes stayed on Max. When we came back Sunday evening, the house felt wrong before anyone said a word. No Molly running to the door. No bright voice calling, "Mom!" No little arms around my waist. The television hummed in the living room. My father sat in his recliner, eyes fixed on the screen. Grace was in the kitchen, laughing at something on her phone. My mother stood near the hallway with her arms folded. Then I saw Molly. She was curled on the couch, pale and small, her left arm wrapped in a cast. Ethan dropped his suitcase. I couldn't breathe. "What happened?" I asked. My mother answered too quickly. "Max knocked her over. She was standing in his way." Ethan moved to Molly first, kneeling beside her, his face draining of color. "Baby, does it hurt?" Molly nodded. I looked at my mother. "You didn't call us?" "She was fine," Mom said. "Kids fall. She has a cast." Grace leaned against the counter and shrugged. Molly's always been clumsy. Something inside me went cold. Then Molly whispered, "Grandma said it was my fault." Brianna laughed. Ethan stood so fast the coffee table rattled. "What did you say to her?" he asked my mother. Mom lifted her chin. "She needs to learn to stay out of the way." That was the moment the room changed. Ethan's voice broke open, sharp and furious. He shouted at my mother, at Grace, at my father for sitting there like furniture while my child suffered. My mother shouted back. Grace called him dramatic. My father finally rose from his recliner, barking Ethan's name like he had authority over him. But Ethan didn't back down. I picked Molly up carefully, feeling how light she was, how tightly she held on to me with her good hand. Her face was pressed into my shoulder, and I could feel her trying not to cry. We left without another word. In the car, Ethan drove while I sat in the back with Molly. Her cast rested across her lap. She looked exhausted, in a way no child should look. Halfway to the hospital, I said the thing I had spent years refusing to say. "They don't love her." Ethan's jaw tightened. "They only love Brianna," I continued, my voice hollow. "To them, Molly is just in the way." Ethan didn't answer, but his hand gripped the steering wheel so hard his knuckles went white. At the hospital, the doctor confirmed what my parents had tried to minimize. Molly's wrist had been fractured. She should have been treated immediately. Waiting had made the pain worse. 4 days later, I filed the report. Animal control took Max. And I called a lawyer. By then, I wasn't screaming anymore. I wasn't even crying. I was calm in a way that scared me. Because when the people who are supposed to love your child treat her pain like an inconvenience, something inside you stops asking for explanations. It starts demanding consequences. Molly started talking more after the cast was replaced. Not all at once, not dramatically. It came out in pieces, usually late at night when the apartment was quiet and Ethan and I sat beside her pretending not to look too shocked by what we were hearing. The first confession came while she traced circles against the edge of her blanket. Grandma made me eat in the laundry room. I looked up from the mug in my hands. What? She said Brianna wanted the dining room to herself. Ethan's expression darkened immediately, but he stayed quiet, letting her continue. There was a little folding table beside the dryer, Molly whispered. Grandpa said smart girls don't watch cartoons, so I wasn't allowed to touch the remote. Every sentence felt like someone tightening wire around my ribs. She cried because Brianna pushed her outside, Ethan said softly, connecting pieces out loud. Molly nodded. Aunt Grace said if I wanted to be part of the family, I needed to toughen up. I stared at the floor because I couldn't bear the look in Ethan's eyes. Not anger at Molly, anger at me, because he had seen this coming long before I had. The worst part wasn't even the words. It was the picture forming underneath them. My family had treated my daughter like an unwanted guest in a house that was supposed to belong to her too. After Molly fell asleep that night, Ethan stood in the kitchen with both hands braced against the counter. They bullied her, he said flatly. I nodded slowly. Then he added something that made my stomach twist. She thinks your mother hit her. I looked up sharply. What? She didn't say slap, Ethan clarified, but the way she described it, grabbing her arm too hard, shoving her aside, yanking her away from Max. The kitchen suddenly felt too small. I remembered all the times my mother grabbed my wrist as a child when she thought I was embarrassing her in public. Not enough to leave bruises, just enough to humiliate. Just enough to remind you who was stronger. I pressed my palms against my face. I should have seen this. Ethan crossed the kitchen quietly and wrapped his arms around me from behind. You wanted to believe your family loved her, he murmured. That's not a crime, Hannah. But it felt like one. Within a week, the lawsuit was officially filed. Neglect, emotional distress, reckless endangerment, failure to seek timely medical care. We included my father and Grace because they had been there. They had watched it happen. They had done nothing. The papers arrived at my parents' house on a Wednesday. They showed up at ours on Friday. My mother cried before I even opened the door fully. Hannah, please, she begged. This has gone too far. My father stood behind her, looking exhausted. Older somehow, like the lawsuit itself had aged him. Grace lingered near the walkway with her arms folded tightly across her chest. Ethan stayed beside me in the doorway. We didn't mean for any of this to happen, Mom said. She's just a child. Children exaggerate. I stared at her. Which part is the exaggeration? I asked quietly. For the first time in my life, my mother had no immediate answer. Instead, she switched tactics. I'll apologize to Molly, she said quickly, if that's what this is about. Like my daughter's pain was a spilled drink that could be wiped away with a reluctant sorry. Grace finally spoke. You're destroying this family over one accident. Ethan laughed once under his breath, but there was no humor in it. One accident? He repeated. You isolated a little girl for an entire weekend. Grace rolled her eyes. Oh my God, Ethan, stop acting like we abused her. You did. The silence after that felt dangerous. Then my father stepped forward. If you continue this lawsuit, he said carefully, there will be consequences. I almost smiled. There it was. Not guilt. Not regret. Control. What kind of consequences? I asked. Grace answered before he could. You'll be out of the inheritance. The words hung there like they were supposed to scare me. For years, they probably would have. My family had always used money like handcuffs, loans with hidden conditions, gifts that came with obedience attached, vacations designed to remind everyone who paid for what. I looked at Ethan. He looked completely unimpressed. Then I laughed. Actually laughed. Grace blinked at me like I'd lost my mind. That's what you think this is about? I asked. Money? Mom's tears stopped abruptly. Her face hardened in a way that felt more honest than the crying had. "You have no idea what you're throwing away." "No," I said softly. "I think for the first time in my life, I finally do." I closed the door. My hands shook afterward, but not from fear. From relief. That night, I logged into the family emergency account. The account had existed for years, shared between my father, my mother, Grace, and me. Officially, it was meant for emergencies or family investments. In reality, my father used it for renovations, and Grace treated it like a backup checking account whenever she overspent. I used to ignore it because challenging them always felt exhausting. Not anymore. I withdrew my legal share. Then, through my lawyer, froze the remainder until the case was resolved. Grace called within 2 hours. At first, she begged. Then she screamed. Then she cried. "You can't do this to us," she shouted through the phone. "I have bills. Brianna's dance tuition is due next week." I stared out the apartment window while she spiraled. "You should have thought about that before mocking my daughter's broken wrist," I replied. "You're unbelievable." "No," I said quietly. "I was unbelievable before, back when I kept pretending you people cared about Molly." She hung up on me. My father left 3 voicemails that night. The first accused Ethan of manipulating me. The second called me selfish. The third was just heavy breathing, followed by, "Your grandfather would be ashamed of you." I deleted all of them. But the strangest part came afterward. People started taking our side. My Aunt Linda texted first. "Your mother treated you exactly like she treats Molly now. You were just too young to notice." I read the message 3 times. Then she called. For over an hour, she told me stories I had buried or normalized, how my mother criticized my appearance constantly as a teenager, how she mocked Ethan during our first Christmas together because he wasn't ambitious enough, how she openly bragged that Brianna had real potential while describing Molly as sensitive. Sensitive. The family word for weak. Then cousins started messaging. One admitted she stopped bringing her kids around because my mother compared them to Brianna nonstop. Another sent me a video from a barbecue the previous summer. I watched it alone in the bedroom after Ethan fell asleep. In the video, Molly tried climbing onto the trampoline with the other kids. Grace immediately said, "Maybe go draw something instead, sweetheart." My mother laughed while handing Brianna a popsicle. Nobody noticed Molly walking away alone. But someone had recorded it anyway. I sat there in the dark staring at the screen long after the video ended. So many people had seen it, and nobody said a word. The court date arrived in the middle of October, under a gray sky that made everything feel colder than it was. I barely slept the night before, not because I was afraid of losing, because some stubborn, pathetic part of me still couldn't believe this was happening at all. Families weren't supposed to end up in courtrooms. Mothers weren't supposed to become legal threats. Grandfathers weren't supposed to sit silently while little girls cried with broken bones. But every time doubt tried creeping in, I pictured Molly sitting alone beside a washing machine while the rest of my family ate dinner together. That image killed any guilt left in me. The morning of the hearing, Ethan adjusted the collar of his coat while I helped Molly braid her hair. "You don't have to come inside if you don't want to," I told her gently. "I want to," she said. Her voice was small but certain. Ethan looked at me over her head, pride and heartbreak mixed together in his expression. By the time we arrived at the courthouse, my stomach felt hollow. My mother arrived 20 minutes late. Of course she did. She wore oversized sunglasses indoors and a beige coat that made her look like she thought this was some kind of social inconvenience instead of the collapse of her family. Grace walked beside her, carrying a leather purse and the same defensive expression she'd worn since the lawsuit began. Like outrage was easier than shame. My father never showed up. Cowardice or pride? Maybe both. The courtroom itself felt strangely quiet. Even footsteps echoed. My mother refused to look at us. Grace looked furious enough for both of them. Ethan sat beside me with one hand resting lightly against my knee, grounding me whenever my breathing became uneven. Then the hearing began. Our lawyer presented everything carefully, methodically. The delayed hospital treatment, the medical records confirming Molly's fracture worsened because care was postponed, the statements from neighbors who heard the screaming the night we picked Molly up, the report from animal control regarding Max's aggression history. Then came the recorded voicemail. My mother's voice filled the courtroom. "She needs to learn to stay out of the way." Hearing it publicly made something inside me snap into focus. No misunderstanding, no exaggeration, no confusion. She really had said it, and worse, she still believed it. Grace shifted uncomfortably beside our mother for the first time all morning. Then our lawyer read Molly's statement. Every word felt heavier than the last. "She made me eat in the laundry room. She said Brianna was more fun. She told me to stop crying because it was my fault. I don't feel safe with them." The courtroom stayed completely silent afterward. Even the judge looked disturbed. My mother still didn't cry. That was the part that haunted me later. Not once during the hearing did she look devastated about hurting Molly, only angry about being exposed. Their attorney tried anyway. He called it a family misunderstanding, said Molly was emotionally sensitive, claimed my mother came from a different generation with stricter parenting styles. At one point, he actually said, "We're talking about grandparents, not criminals." The judge didn't even blink. "Neglect does not become acceptable because it occurs within a family," she replied sharply. I watched Grace's confidence crack a little after that. Then came the question none of us expected. The judge asked why medical treatment had been delayed for hours after Molly's injury. Grace answered before my mother could. "We thought she was overreacting." Molly shrank beside me instantly. Ethan's jaw flexed so hard, I thought he might stand up. The judge noticed too. And I think that was the moment the outcome became inevitable. The ruling came less than an hour later. My mother was found civilly liable for negligence and emotional harm. The financial penalty was significant, but I knew immediately that the money wasn't what devastated her. It was the restraining order. Official, public, permanent. She was legally forbidden from contacting Molly or coming within 500 feet of her. No surprise visits, no holidays, no chances to rewrite the story later. The truth now existed on paper, forever. My mother stood slowly after the ruling, almost mechanically, like her body had stopped understanding movement. Then she finally looked at me. Not sad, not apologetic. Furious. Like I had betrayed her by refusing to stay silent. Grace followed her toward the exit, but paused near our row. For 1 second, I thought maybe she would apologize. Instead, she leaned close enough for only me to hear. "You destroyed this family." Then she walked away. I sat there staring ahead long after they disappeared. Destroyed. The word echoed strangely in my chest. Because the truth was, this family had already been broken long before I filed anything. I had just stopped pretending otherwise. Outside the courthouse, the autumn wind hit hard enough to sting. Molly slipped her hand into Ethan's. "Can we get pancakes?" she asked quietly. "I'm hungry." Ethan laughed softly for the first time all day. "Yeah, sweetheart," he said. "We can get pancakes." So we went to her favorite diner. Nothing fancy. Sticky menus, old vinyl booths, a waitress who called everyone honey. And somehow it felt more comforting than every polished holiday dinner my parents had ever hosted. Molly ordered chocolate chip pancakes and actually smiled while eating them. A real smile, not the careful little expression she used around my family. Ethan watched her across the table like he was seeing sunlight after months underground. At one point, Molly reached for syrup with her healing wrist and winced slightly. Ethan immediately studied the bottle for her without making a scene about it. That tiny gesture nearly broke me. Because protecting her had always been this simple. Pay attention. Be kind. Believe her. Back home, the apartment felt different. Quieter. But lighter. For the first time in weeks, Molly fell asleep without leaving her bedroom light on. Ethan stood in the hallway watching her sleep for a moment before closing the door gently. "She looks peaceful," he whispered. I nodded, but deep down, I knew this wasn't over. My father had stayed silent too long. Grace had too much resentment. And people like my mother never accepted consequences quietly. A week later, the next attack came. I received a notice from the county clerk's office while making coffee. My father had listed the family lake house for sale. The lake house had been in our family for over 40 years. Every 4th of July, every summer barbecue, every childhood memory. Molly's little fox drawings were probably still taped to the refrigerator there. He didn't call first, didn't warn me. He simply tried to sell it out from under us before I could react. I contacted the listing agent immediately. He said the family no longer uses the property, she explained carefully, and that he needed to liquidate for medical expenses. A complete lie. My father wasn't sick, he was angry. And angry people with power will burn down their own history if it means nobody else can keep any part of it. Ethan read the paperwork slowly that night, then looked up at me. "He wants to erase you," he said. "No," I whispered. I stared at the sale documents again, suddenly understanding everything. "He wants to erase Molly." We stopped sleeping normally after that. Not because we were scared. Because every time my family lost control of one thing, they immediately reached for another. The lake house sale was frozen within 48 hours after our lawyer approved partial ownership rights under my grandfather's original estate structure. My father apparently thought I would either stay quiet or feel too emotionally exhausted to fight back. He still didn't understand something important. The version of me he raised, the obedient daughter desperate for approval, was gone. And he hated the woman who replaced her. Grace took the next shot. Of course she did it online. 3 days after the lake house sale was halted, she launched a GoFundMe campaign titled, "Help Brianna Keep Dancing." The description was pure manipulation. She claimed their family had suffered devastating financial losses from a legal dispute fueled by bitterness and revenge. She never used our names directly, but she didn't have to. Everyone knew. Worst of all, she used a photo of Brianna in her dance costume, smiling into the camera with stage makeup and curled hair, completely unaware she was being turned into emotional bait. The caption underneath read, "Real family stays loyal no matter what." I stared at the page in disbelief. Ethan looked over my shoulder and muttered, "Unbelievable." But what made my stomach turn were the comments. "Praying for your family. Some people destroy everything over pride. Children suffer most when adults choose greed." Donations poured in from distant relatives, former neighbors, church friends, people who only knew the polished version of my family. Grace had transformed herself into the victim. And for one dangerous moment, I wanted to destroy her publicly. I drafted a post exposing everything: the medical reports, the restraining order, the voicemail, the laundry room. My hands shook while typing. Then Ethan gently took my phone from me. "She wants you angry in public," he said quietly. "That's the trap." I hated that he was right. So instead, we documented everything. Screenshots, comments, donation records, false claims. Every single detail went directly to our lawyer. 2 days later, Grace received a cease and desist order for defamation and fraudulent representation. The GoFundMe disappeared that same night. The silence afterward felt worse. Because silence from my family never meant surrender. It meant planning. The next bomb arrived on a Thursday evening while Molly painted foxes at the dining room table. I remember that detail clearly because she was humming softly to herself, finally relaxed enough to make little messes again. That was when my email notification appeared. A property attorney I didn't recognize. I opened the attachment slowly, then felt all the blood drain from my face. Grace and my father had filed paperwork to restructure the family trust. The trust created by my grandfather. The one tied to family land, investments, properties, and long-term estate control. They were attempting to remove me completely. Not just me. Ethan. Molly. Future descendants. All erased. I handed the phone silently to Ethan. He read for about 30 seconds before laughing once in disbelief. The audacity is almost impressive. Molly looked up from the table. "What's wrong?" "Nothing you need to worry about," Ethan said immediately, calm and gentle. She studied our faces carefully anyway. Children always know more than adults think. After she went to bed, Ethan and I sat in the kitchen, surrounded by legal papers. Rain tapped softly against the windows. I felt exhausted in a way that reached my bones. "They'll never stop," I whispered. Ethan reached across the table and took my hand. "Nope," he agreed, "not until they lose." The injunction was filed the next morning. Our lawyer argued bad faith restructuring, retaliation, and violation of original trust protections established by my grandfather decades earlier. The hearing was scheduled quickly. Apparently, judges become very interested when wealthy families start weaponizing inheritance structures out of spite. By then, though, something inside me had changed. I wasn't fighting for revenge anymore. I was fighting for distance. For peace. For the right to exist without my family trying to punish us for protecting Molly. And the strangest part? Molly was healing faster than any of us. Her wrist had improved enough for physical therapy. She laughed more now. Slept through the night. Started leaving drawings on the refrigerator again. One afternoon, she even asked Ethan about dance classes. Not because she wanted to be Brianna, because she wanted to try something that belonged only to her. Ethan nearly cried right there in the kitchen. When the trust hearing arrived, my father finally appeared again. I barely recognized him. He looked smaller somehow, less commanding. Like someone slowly realizing the world no longer moved just because he demanded it to. Grace sat beside him stiffly, eyes shadowed from stress. The judge reviewed everything carefully. The unauthorized restructuring attempt. The retaliatory timing. The exclusion clauses targeting me and Molly specifically. The failed GoFundMe campaign. The ongoing harassment after the restraining order. By the end of the hearing, even their attorney looked tired. Then came the ruling. The original trust would remain untouched. My father and Grace were permanently removed from managerial authority over estate assets. I was reinstated as acting trustee under my grandfather's original provisions. Grace stood up so abruptly, her chair scraped loudly across the courtroom floor. "This is insane," she snapped. The judge didn't even react. My father just sat there, staring downward, defeated for the first time in my entire life. Grace stormed out before the hearing officially ended. My father stayed behind several extra seconds, like he wanted to say something. An apology, maybe. An explanation. Instead, he walked away without a word. The real ending came quietly. A week later, my father called me. I let it go to voicemail. His voice sounded older. Tired. "I hope you're happy now," he said. "I never thought my own daughter would turn against her family." I almost deleted the message immediately. Then he added something that made me save it forever. "I just hope Brianna grows up understanding what real loyalty looks like." Loyalty. That word again. As if silence in the face of cruelty was somehow noble. As if protecting my child made me the traitor. We moved 3 months later. Not across the country. Just far enough away that grocery stores stopped feeling tense. Far enough that I no longer worried about seeing my mother's car at traffic lights. The new house was smaller. Quieter. Peaceful. Molly helped pack boxes by drawing tiny foxes on the tape labels. Ethan assembled furniture while singing badly on purpose just to make her laugh. The morning we left the old neighborhood, I stood on the porch holding the final box. Ethan locked the front door, then looked at me. "Never again," he said softly. I nodded. Because we both understood exactly what he meant. No more forced holidays. No more begging toxic people to love our daughter correctly. No more confusing access with family. We changed our phone numbers. Kept the address private. And for the first time in years, life became quiet enough for healing. Grace eventually sold the BMW she could barely afford. Her husband left 2 months later and moved back with his parents, taking Brianna with him part-time. My father tried restarting the family investment account under another name. Nobody joined. Too many people had finally seen who he really was once control slipped from his hands. Funny how quickly power disappears when fear disappears with it. I never told Molly every detail. She doesn't need the full ugliness. She only needs to know 3 things. We believed her. We protected her. And we chose her. Every single time. Last night, her school held an art show. Her painting, a small fox sitting beneath a dark blue tree at dusk, hung near the entrance. Not because it won an award. Because her teacher said people kept stopping in front of it longer than the others. Quiet things matter too. Afterward, we got ice cream despite the cold weather. Molly sat between Ethan and me on a bench outside the shop, bundled in Ethan's oversized scarf. Halfway through her cone, she smiled softly and said, "I like our life now. I feel safe." Ethan looked at me immediately. His eyes were glassy. Mine probably were too. Because after everything, the lawsuits, the betrayal, the screaming, the grief. That one sentence made all of it worth it. We are not perfect people, but we are free. And Molly is happy.